Our next two speakers are gold sponsors of this conference. They're going to be companies that are very familiar to you, especially this first one. Turnitin has become ubiquitous. Most of us know it, most of us have used it. And the thing that sets Turnitin apart from some of the other plagiarism detection programs is its overtly educational aim, especially here in Europe and in the United Kingdom. It definitely has aspirations to actually assist in educating, in addition to simply identifying plagiarism. So if you all help me welcome Goa Borrek, he's going to tell you about Turnitin's journey in terms of academic integrity.
Hello, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Goa. I've been working with Turnitin for 2.5 years. Before that, I worked for Everest, which used to be the Turnitin nemesis here in Europe. For those who do know me, hi. I want to thank Thomas and everybody for inviting us again. I actually wanted to share a little bit what I've learned since the last conference we had here in Brno 2 years ago. Thank you, Teddy, for explaining how I feel also. So I want this to make this a personal talk. I need this. Does this work? Right. So what I like about the Turnitin approach, and specifically the solution you see here presented, it's called Feedback Studio. I want Turnitin to be less hated by students. You should see our Twitter feed. It's really a nice collection of foul language. I need people to understand that if we don't have an educational approach to preventing the issue of plagiarism, we're basically summarizing how bad things are. And there is a sort of a dark cloud, lots of data on how things are actually going in the wrong direction. Yes, it is a very good idea to detect. I see this detection as a measurement of what's going on. In the past 2 years, I've visited about, let's say, between 60 and 70 universities per year, and I listen. I listen to what their issues are. Their issues are similar, where they have great concerns, but also don't want to force their teachers, their teaching staff, into changing the status quo. So defining plagiarism and defining a policy around penalty systems is something that creeps into the culture. And I'm trying to listen, I'm trying to figure out how to change this into a more positive note. I see, and the company as well, but I want to make this personal, I see plagiarism as a symptom of bad writing skills. Yes, there are students who will try to cheat you, and yes, they make it hard for teachers to trust students, to say, hey, I've copied accidentally. Or for whenever a student claims that they did not get the correct feedback or did not know that something was not supposed to be written this way. I didn't understand the current way to cite. What is a good reference? I ask the teachers what they do to actually prepare the students for that moment in time when they have to write something important. Usually that's the bachelor thesis. Time pressure, plagiarism, illegible comments, the writing assessments. This is a combination of what teachers and students tell me. I don't have a lot of time. And in fact, I agree, Tracy, asking them to deliver something in 5 days makes the problem even bigger. Plagiarism, it's usually well defined top-down. I've spoken to universities that have written a definition into their ethical codex, and it took them years to define something that they could stand behind, but no teacher agrees with the definition that another has. Illegible comments, that's exactly what students will say. Listen, I don't understand what you're saying here. How should I improve my writing? In fact, they're saying, I don't want to revise my work. They see it as a one-off moment. They write it, they throw it out, and it's weekend. They're not encouraged to rewrite. They're not encouraged to revise their own work. And then the assessment, how do I track my students' work? Part of that, actually, Turnitin is actually working on a similar thing, and I'm very glad you raised agree. with a lot of data can come a lot of analysis, and we can actually follow it a bit what a writing style of a student would be, but we're not there yet. Promoting original writing, I think, is far more important to stay on the positive side of this conversation, because the connection between teacher and student is what we want to improve. Using the word plagiarism usually makes that conversation impossible, because it's actually an accusation. Promoting original writing, I actually prefer to use the word originality checking instead of checking for plagiarism. I don't think there is a tool around on the planet that detects plagiarism. It is the interpretation of the teacher that defines what the student should do. I think expelling students is the most horrible thing that could happen. Encouraging students to take ownership of their own ideas requires clear communication between teacher and student, and a good bond. It's literally a relationship between these two people. We do this by evaluating the students' work quickly, consistently, and making sure the student understands what's going on. If they understand what the expectations are, if they know what to do, what to change, that's the first step into getting these students to feel okay about revising their work. It's not a one-off event. You should be taught how to write on academic level. I see too many universities where students are seen as adults, they pay tuition, and they are treated as adults. And especially engineers, and I'm very happy you raised the issue of engineers. At every institute I talk to, I actually see the same issue where the engineers deliver the worst papers or thesis. They're the ones that practice least writing. No institute feels very comfortable about changing the curriculum. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of negotiations. But getting students to write more is really a first step. The immediate reaction from any teaching staff will be, we don't have time to react to any written piece of paper from every student. So the actual question is, how do we win time so that happens? These students are there to get feedback from their teachers. The feedback part is crucial. It is crucial for students to learn. This is an image I use to visualize how we've learned that institutes should apply a combination of feedback and checking. Checking is still important. Tomorrow you're publishing something and a university's name is on this piece of paper. I agree, it's very important. So if you assume that this is the institute you work at, and here on the left it's the first day of the student at the university, and on the right they leave and become the next Prime Minister of Education. From up till down, it is the value that the solution actually brings. So checking for originality is not very valuable for first-year students because they're usually the largest group. They usually just come from school and actually don't know how to write on academic level. So it's very unfair to treat them as such, and nobody has time to check and penalize the students that just joined your university. So by the time they start writing something interesting, the time invested, the energy invested in there makes the written work more important. And that's where basically Turnitin and other detection solutions, let's put it like that, are there to reduce the risk to the institute. Checking for originality, and the blue part is what I use to indicate a little bit of an educational value. Promoting original writing is, of course, very, very, very useful. What we want is actually to go one step further, and it's to make sure that the student who does join your university today gets an immediate amount of digital feedback. I've seen in every university that students prefer digital feedback. They prefer digital feedback over face-to-face conversations. They don't want to stand in line to speak to the professor. The professor doesn't want to speak to all the students all at once because their questions can be either a repetition of the one before them, or it can be simple questions like, why did I not make my grade? Making sure that a first-year student receives a lot of feedback, preparing him for the moment that he has to write something important, is, I think, the job of the educational institution. Using words like plagiarism, catching students, that sounds a lot like the work for the police. It sounds a lot like the words that would be used by the lawyer of the original writer who feel he has been stolen from. Originality checking is something that students will accept if the majority starts out by getting good feedback, clear feedback that is, well, that is actually an extension of the teacher's reach. The teacher cannot speak to all the students, but he can try to promote clear language and to make sure that the language is also used among students. So the universities I've visited and that are using Turnitin Feedback Studio fanatically have found that it designs a language between teacher and students, because now the expectations are clear to students. And it makes sure that students feel comfortable with rewriting their own work. So you see how increasing the amount of feedback, the quality, actually makes sure that by the time they write something important, the risk actually goes down. We don't want to be in a position where we catch more students. We want to be in a position where we don't worry about the students by the time they have to write something. In the past 2 years, I've tried to plot all the institutes that I visited into a map. So where are institutes on this scale from plagiarism to academic excellence? There are many universities that are actually in the beginning. So the ownership is clear, the behavior on how the institute actually reacts, the challenges you're facing, and the expected outcomes. My job is to listen to many of these universities to make sure they move towards the right direction. Is anyone here who feels very comfortable in saying, my institute is in this column? Please take a second to have a read. So it moves from the ownership being actually not owned by anyone at all, to a non-institutional one, but more of a erratic, random one, an adoption of any kind of technology for the detection side. Now remember that detection, in my point of view, is just a measurement. So if you measure how much there is being submitted as unoriginal, the outcome is knowing what to do now. Knowing what to do is improving the writing skills. Now there's no place for us in the political arena to catch people that we feel are now prime minister and have plagiarized somewhere else. I think we should focus on the students. And I think this conversation should be a positive one. And I think it should be about clear language. Anyone who's scanned through this and now feels comfortable in saying, my institute is to the right of the middle, on the developing or the sustaining stage? One Brit, one Australian? Romanian? Yes. Lithuanian? Anyone who would actually say, listen, we're at the sustaining side, we're on the far end of the spectrum? Well done. Can I ask you where you're from? Australia. Good. Anyone feels comfortable saying, listen, we're in the middle. We're checking, we're using a technology. There's no real policy around it at the moment, but the technical possibilities are in place. The root cause of plagiarism, which I believe is really preparing the students to be ready to write something important, are not yet addressed. The student awareness is increased basically by talking about plagiarism and in some universities literally putting the fear of God in them. Listen, you cannot do this because you'll be thrown out or there's a suspension. You feel...
No, I want to say I think you're missing one column to the left of beginning.
Okay.
And that's the obstructive institution. It is actively keeping its staff from doing anything about academic integrity.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let me see if we can map that one as well. So you feel you're on that side?
Yeah.
Really? All right.
Maybe you haven't been there, Goa, that's why you don't know this.
So,
They didn't invite you there because
please invite me. So I worked in the south of Europe, and there I actually see the institutes moving from checking to developing. I wanted to close off, and I want to actually leave a lot of room for questions. by seeing a happy trend. I see a lot of universities moving from the detection phase. We want to detect and catch students, because it takes a year or two after fanatic usage of a solution to figure out that you're just measuring, you're not changing anything. And scaring students by explaining how bad it is to plagiarize something actually destroys the possibility of reaching out to that student and making sure that he's prepared the next time I want him to write something better and own the words that he puts on paper. So this trend is actually moving along. To give you a good example, Spain is a good example, which was for us a surprise. Only 3 years ago it started out by just detecting. More than half of these institutes that are now working with Turnitin are moving on to prevention. They're letting go what their definition of plagiarism is. They're using the approach of originality. Another challenge is unoriginality doesn't translate very well in all the languages. But they're moving towards digital feedback. Not only because students want digital feedback, they listen to their students, but it makes the teachers reach, it improves the teachers' reach. It's very simple. It's simple like that. Good. Let me see if I'm missing anything. All right. Yeah, I have one last question, and I'm not sure if I just get the phonetic answer just as before. Who actually here feels like they're preparing their students enough to expect a bachelor thesis that clears the bar, passes the grade? I'm expecting some. Okay, Tracy, I know you do. So to explain again, who feels comfortable enough to say, listen, our students, they get what they need in terms of feedback, in terms of training, to make sure that their bachelor thesis at least is clear of plagiarism, at least has a construct. Right, thanks. I'm expecting loads of hands here. So I'm actually asking this because I also ask this at the universities that I visit. The normal response is, yes, they get a course in the first year on how to write a thesis, on what the build-up should look like. They get examples. And when I ask, is this repeated? They usually say, well, there is a second year course, but nobody really repeats it. I think if you don't constantly feed your students and remind them on what is needed to actually produce written work that is on academic writing level, you shouldn't be surprised if your engineers come up with a bachelor thesis that shocks you. I see teachers who compensate for the lack of writing skills for their students and write their bachelor thesis for them. Wow. I mean, I'm pretty sure teachers have enough to do. I'm pretty sure that the vocation makes sure that they don't do it for the fame, they don't do it for the money. They're there because they want these students to come out better than they did. If we help them, I think we're actually attacking the root of this issue. If we change the word from plagiarism to originality checking, I'm thinking you're making one step forward into changing this into a positive conversation and actually making it possible to reach out to your students. If you focus on the students that are not there yet, that are not yet measured by their thesis, bachelor, master, or whatever they need to put in that is a measurement of how good the education of your institute is, they should be fed. They should be fed with guidance to make sure you don't have to worry by the time that they're actually writing something. So that's what I've learned in the past 2 years traveling around Europe. And I'm very glad that, to see familiar faces and new faces, so I can share this with you. Let me see. Please make sure to visit Jill. She's there on the back. She'll be doing a workshop this afternoon around academic integrity, also on a positive note. And I want to leave a lot of room for questions, actually. Is that possible? Thank you.